My heart raced so fast that I could hear each of its beats. It was the first time I had felt that unsettling sensation. Anxiety took over my body and my mind. I felt the urge to run out of the math class. My classmates and the teacher were looking at me strangely. "Are you okay?" Luna asked, who was sitting in the desk next to mine. "You look very pale." Suddenly, without knowing why, I stood up and left the classroom without giving any explanation. The only thing I said was, "I have to go." I ran towards my house. As it was only 5 blocks away from the school, I wanted to get there as quickly as possible. I felt like I needed to be there for some reason, and tears welled up in my eyes. What was happening? I asked myself. When I finally arrived and opened the door, I found my father and my uncle with an expression that something had occurred. "What happened? What happened?" I repeated nervously. "Oh, dear, it's just that your grandmother Julia passed away," my father responded sadly. I headed to my room and locked myself crying. My mother was having lunch with one of my sisters, who had invited her to a Mexican restaurant. When they returned, Dad didn't know how to break the news to his wife that her mother had died. "Why do you have that expression?" Mom asked. Dad told her to sit down and then broke her the terrible news. She let out a scream and started crying. "It's not true, it can't be," she repeated over and over. Meanwhile, I laid on my bed, thinking about how my grandma had warned me of her death. That's why I was in such a hurry to get home and felt that sense of anxiety and sadness. I remembered when I visited her in Medellin 3 months ago. "My dear, I want to give you some things," she said. She started pulling out items from her closet, calling them her treasures, and telling me she wanted me to keep them. I asked her why she was giving away her belongings. "Oh, dear, it's just that I won't be here much longer," she said. I said to her that she was going to live for many more years and that there was no need for her to give away her things yet. But my grandmother insisted. It seemed she had a premonition of her death, as often happens with the elderly. The next day, I headed to the airport to see my older sister who would spend a few hours in Bogotá before taking the next flight to Medellin for the funeral. I felt sad because, being the youngest, they didn't want to take me to say goodbye to my grandmother, using the excuse that I couldn't miss school. While I was on the bus to the airport, I felt someone was looking at me. Then I saw an older woman with eyes as blue as the sky, gazing at me with gentleness. The resemblance to my grandma was so striking that I began to think she was her. The old woman smiled at me without breaking eye contact. So, I felt sadness and a deep sense of melancholy as I realized I would never see that cheerful and sweet grandmother again. The one who used to sneak me chocolates. The woman who had taught me to play my first piano piece. The one who hummed and danced the rock songs I listened to back then, telling me that the rhythm resembled the Charleston. That beloved grandmother, cherished by everyone in the neighborhood for her kindness and generosity. I wouldn't hear her stories and youthful secrets anymore, and I wouldn't have grandparents anymore, as some had passed away and others I hadn't even met. I would have to accept that she was no longer in this dimension, but from that moment on, she would reside in another place, my heart.